Had a vasectomy to protect our family plans, but years later that she told me she was pregnant, and I believed her until a routine checkup led to the reality that I was still sterile, and the kid I raised wasn't even mine. There was a moment, just a flash of stillness in a hectic day, when I'd seen my daughter's face and felt something I couldn't quite place, like a murmur at the back of my head telling me something was off, not in a melodramatic way, not in a moment of truth kind of way, but in a low, gnawing sense I kept pushing to the back of my mind, telling myself I was imagining things. That fatherhood didn't come with an instruction manual or mandatory emotional map, but something deep inside me knew that something was off, and I kept pushing it away because to even consider it felt like betrayal, not hers, but of everything I thought my life had become. The late-night feedings and school pickups and the way she said, "Daddy," with such innocence. And yet there I was, smiling and pretending not to hear that voice in my head as I went through birthday parties and bedtime stories, because I had no reason to question, not really, not logically, except, of course, that I'd had a vasectomy 3 years prior to when she was born, and although I told myself I didn't have to go back over that fact, the timing had always been fuzzy in my head, hidden behind layers of trust and routine and that unspoken knowledge that love sometimes involved not asking too many questions. But now looking back, I realized that questions had always lingered, hidden behind my need to keep our family whole, to keep the facade of us unshattered, even when the cracks were already starting and I was trying my best to ignore them, because I loved my wife. Or I thought I did, until the day that love careened into something far colder and truer than any vow or kiss or morning cup of coffee together, something that ripped open a truth I wasn't prepared to face, even though the signs had been lurking in plain view for years, speaking in her body language, in the carefully rehearsed way she recited stories of the past, in the gaps of certain information that only makes sense through the lens of betrayal. And it all started to fall apart, not in one cinematic moment like the movies, but strand by agonizing strand like watching a rope unravel. And I think the moment that finally shattered me was when I'd opened up the hallway drawer to clean out the mess, and discovered the old medical record, the one from the clinic, the one that told me what I'd known all along. But how long had she known? Whom had she revealed it to apart from herself? Was it a slip or a choice or weakness that she never confessed? I didn't confront her right away. I didn't even speak for a few hours. I just sat there on the edge of the bed holding that paper like it was radioactive, because in a way, it was. It had the power to destroy everything I'd built my life around, the family I thought I had, the trust one thought was mutual, and yet I couldn't let go of the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong, that there had been some medical fluke or miscommunication. So I booked an appointment, quietly, secretly, told her it was for a routine checkup, and I went back to the same clinic, sat in the same waiting room, filled out the same paperwork, only this time my hands were shaking, my mouth dry, and when the results came back, confirming that I was still sterile after all these years, the weight of the truth slammed into me like a train, and I remember walking back to my car in the parking lot, sitting in the driver's seat with the door still open, staring at nothing for what felt like hours because I knew what had to come next, but I didn't know if I had the strength to do it. I'd been lied to for years, and not just about a fling or a one-night stand, but about a life, about a child I had raised and loved and called my own, and that betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever imagined, because it wasn't just about her infidelity, it was about the theft of trust, of years I could never get back, of memories that were now tainted by a truth I hadn't asked for but couldn't unlearn. And when I finally confronted her, I did it quietly, not with yelling or accusations, but with the envelope in my hand and a tremble in my voice, asking her if there was anything she wanted to tell me before I opened it, and the look on her face, the instant shift from confusion to fear to something like resignation, told me everything before she even said a word. She sat down slowly, like her knees had given out, and she didn't deny it, not even for a second. She just looked at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "I was afraid you'd leave." And in that moment I think a part of me broke, not because of the cheating, that would have been bad enough, but because of the years of pretending, of letting me believe in a lie so deeply that I'd built my entire world around it. And I asked her who the father was, but she said she didn't know for sure, that it had been a confusing time, and somehow that made it worse, the idea that my child had been born from a moment so carelessly hidden that it couldn't even be traced back to a single face. And then came the hardest part. The part I'd been avoiding even as I'd planned for it, the DNA test, the final nail in the coffin of the story I'd been living, and I'll never forget the day the results came in, how I sat there with the paper in one hand and a photo of her in the other, the little girl who called me Daddy, who ran into my arms when she was scared, who looked up at me with trust one didn't deserve to break. And yet, she wasn't mine, not biologically, not genetically, not in the way I had believed, and in that moment, I felt like I had lost everything, and I didn't even know where to go from there, how to pick up the pieces of a life that had been built on a foundation of lies, and the worst part was, I still loved that child, I still saw her as mine in all the ways that mattered. But now I had to choose between staying in a lie or walking away from the only version of fatherhood I'd ever known. I didn't say anything to her that night, not after reading the DNA results. I just sat at the kitchen table long after the lights had gone out, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling, like even the walls were uneasy with what had been revealed, and I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside me and scooped out everything I thought I was, leaving behind only the shell of a man who didn't know where he stood anymore. Not in his marriage, not in his home, not even in the story of his own life, because every memory now had a shadow cast over it, and I couldn't stop myself from reliving moments that suddenly felt like scenes from a play I hadn't realized I was acting in, like when she told me she was pregnant, and I cried because I thought we'd beaten the odds. Or the night our daughter was born and I held her for the first time and felt like the universe had handed me something sacred. Or all the times I defended our marriage when people doubted her or questioned our closeness, and now every smile, every hug, every I love you between us played back in my mind like static, distorted by the knowledge that it wasn't real, not the way I thought it was, and the next morning I watched her making breakfast like nothing had changed, like she hadn't detonated a bomb under the foundation of our life. And I kept wondering how she'd been able to live with it, day after day, year after year, while I played the role of husband and father with my whole heart. I asked her to sit down, and she looked at me with that same quiet panic I'd seen the day before, and I told her I knew that I had the DNA results, that she didn't need to lie anymore, and I think she expected me to scream or throw something or storm out, but all I did was sit there with my hands shaking and ask her why, and what followed was a silence that felt like it stretched for years. Until she finally whispered that she never meant to hurt me, that it had only happened once, that she didn't even know she was pregnant until weeks later, and that by then she had already decided she couldn't lose me, and the thing is, I wanted to believe her, I really did, but there were too many holes in her story, too many things that didn't line up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about one mistake, this was about choices. Conscious choices to lie, to cover it up, to let me build a life around a falsehood, and I told her that, told her how it felt like my memories weren't mine anymore, like someone had broken into my past and rewritten it without telling me, and she cried, begged me to forgive her, said that I was the only father our daughter had ever known and that she didn't want to lose me. And part of me felt sick because I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I didn't know if I could stay and pretend that nothing had changed, or if walking away would make me even worse, like I was punishing an innocent child for something she had no part in, and that's what haunted me most, not the betrayal itself, but the collateral damage. The way this truth was going to rip through the life of a little girl who thought I was her dad, and how do you explain something like that to a child? How can you stand over here and tell her, I'm not your real father, when you were everything a real father would ever be for all those years? I didn't sleep for days, just walked around the house like a ghost, caught between rage and heartbreak, unable to make a decision, because no matter what I chose, someone was going to get hurt, and I started avoiding them both. Leaving early for work, coming home late, staying in my car long after I'd pulled into the driveway, because I couldn't face the eyes of a woman who broke me, or the smile of a child who unknowingly reminded me of everything I'd lost. I kept hoping something would push me in one direction or the other, some clarity, some sign, and then one afternoon I found a drawing on the fridge, one she had made at school, of our family, me, her, and her mom. And in her little handwriting she'd written, My daddy is my hero. And I swear my knees buckled. I just sat on the kitchen floor holding that paper like it was made of glass, because I couldn't breathe under the weight of it, the innocence, the love, the unknowing devotion she had for me. And I knew in that moment that no matter what her DNA said, I was her father in every way that mattered. But I also knew I couldn't live with someone who had betrayed me so deeply, and then kept that betrayal secret while I unknowingly poured my heart into a lie. So I made a choice, maybe the hardest one I've ever made, and I told her I wanted a divorce, that I couldn't rebuild trust on a foundation that had been intentionally cracked and hidden for years, and she broke down, pleaded with me, told me I was tearing our family apart. But I reminded her that it had already been torn the moment she decided I didn't deserve the truth, and I said I wasn't going to abandon our daughter, that I would fight for some form of custody or visitation if she'd let me, because I still loved that little girl more than life itself, and what happened next was complicated and painful and dragged out over months. Court dates, therapy, lawyers, questions about parental rights and what constitutes fatherhood when there's no biological tie, and at the end of it all I was given shared custody, not because of blood, but because the court recognized the years I had spent as her father, the bond we had built, the love that couldn't be undone by a lab report, and every time I see her now, every weekend we spend together, there's a bittersweet ache in my chest, because I know I'm giving her something real while living with something broken, and I've made peace with that. Or at least, I'm trying to, because betrayal doesn't disappear just because you choose to keep loving someone who didn't ask to be part of the lie, and forgiveness isn't a clean line you cross, it's a daily choice not to let the pain consume you. And some days I still wake up wondering what my life might have been if she had just told me the truth from the beginning, if we had faced it together instead of me finding out alone. After years of devotion to a version of life that never really existed. Over time, the sharp edges of the pain dulled, not because they stopped cutting, but because I learned how to live around them, the way people learn to move without bumping into furniture in the dark, instinctively, carefully, always aware of what's there even when it's no longer being spoken about. And I think the hardest part, the part no one really talks about, is how much silence betrayal leaves behind. How many conversations die before they ever start, because you don't know how to bring them up without unraveling yourself all over again. And so you just keep moving, smiling when you need to, nodding when people ask if you're okay, and avoiding the kinds of questions that might crack open the parts of you still holding everything together with sheer willpower. And that was me, for a long time. Pretending I'd healed, showing up to work like I wasn't hollowed out, spending weekends with my daughter like I wasn't still fighting back tears every time she reached for my hand, and telling myself that moving on meant not looking back, even though the past was still clinging to me like smoke, invisible but suffocating. And I think the worst moments were the quiet ones, the ones no one saw. Like standing in the shower too long just to cry where no one could hear me, or laying awake at 3 a.m. replaying old conversations with her, wondering if I had ever really known the person I married, if the love I felt had been real or just a reflection of my own hope projected onto someone who never deserved it. And there were nights I hated her, truly hated her, not just for what she did, but for what she stole from me. Not just trust, but certainty, identity, the foundation of who I thought I was as a husband, as a father, as a man, and yet somehow, at the same time, there were other nights when I missed her, or maybe I missed who I thought she was, the version of her I'd fallen in love with, the person who made me laugh during late-night grocery runs or kissed me on the cheek when she thought I was asleep, and that contradiction drove me crazy. How you can love and hate someone at the same time, how betrayal doesn't erase affection, it just poisons it slowly, until you're left drinking from a cup that makes you sick but still feels familiar in your hands. And I tried dating again, eventually, but every conversation felt forced, every smile felt like a performance, and every time someone reached for my hand I pulled away, not because I didn't want to feel something again, but because I was terrified that whatever I built would be a lie too, and I wasn't sure I had it in me to survive another collapse, so I threw myself into routines, into work, into reading and walking and finding silence in places where I used to find companionship, and people told me I was strong, that I'd handled it with grace, that they admired how calm I'd been through it all, but if they could have seen the wreckage inside me, they'd have known it wasn't strength, it was just survival. Numb, necessary survival. And what no one tells you is that sometimes surviving hurts worse than breaking down, because you carry everything with you, tucked behind polite smiles and hollow jokes, pretending the life you lost wasn't the only one you ever really wanted, and through it all, the one constant was her, our daughter, and I say, our, not because of biology but because love has its own kind of DNA. And mine is woven into her in ways that blood could never measure, and being with her was both healing and heartbreaking, because every laugh, every question, Every drawing she made for me reminded me that I was still needed, still loved, still seen. But it also reminded me of what I'd lost, of the lie that created her and the truth that made loving her so damn complicated. And yet, somehow, I kept showing up, not because I had to, but because I couldn't not. Because I looked at her and saw the only good thing that came out of all the destruction, and I couldn't walk away from that, even when it would have been easier. And now, years later, the wounds are still there, but they're scarred over, not gone, never gone, but no longer bleeding. And I've learned that betrayal doesn't define you, it just reveals what you're made of. And I'm made of more than pain, more than anger, more than the lies that almost broke me. I'm made of love that endured when it had every reason to die, of patience I didn't know I had, and of a kind of clarity that only comes from having everything ripped away and still choosing to rebuild, not in the same place, not with the same people, but with the same heart. Only wiser now, more guarded maybe, but also more honest. And I look back at who I was, the man who trusted too blindly, who gave too freely, who believed love alone was enough. And I don't pity him, I don't even resent him, I mourn him, because he deserved better. And now I try to live in a way that honors him, by choosing truth over comfort, by asking the hard questions, and by never again silencing the voice in my head when it whispers that something isn't right, because that voice, the one I ignored for so long, was the only honest thing in a house full of secrets, and now I listen to it. Even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, because pain doesn't lie. People do, and what I've learned is that trust is a gift, not a guarantee, and once it's broken, the pieces never fit back the same way again. But that doesn't mean you can't build something new, something honest, something real. It just means you have to do it with open eyes, with a guarded heart, and with the understanding that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you're given, and sometimes, being a father has nothing to do with blood and everything to do with love, and that love, the kind that survives betrayal and keeps showing up anyway, that's the kind of man I am now, and that's enough for me. The legal proceedings that followed were like a slow-motion nightmare, the kind where nothing ever moves fast enough to be real, but everything still hurts like a hellish burn. And even though I knew what I was doing was right, there were moments when I questioned it all, because when you're in court attempting to demonstrate that love that you've given is worth more than the blood that you don't share, it strips you bare in ways that you could never possibly anticipate. And I remember sitting across from her during one of those sessions, one lawyer on each side, and all I could do was think, how did we get here? How did something that started out in laughter and promises end up in depositions and character witnesses? And I hated that it had to be this way, that we had to fight to retain what was meant to be unbreakable. But I wasn't going to abandon my daughter, not after raising her, not after being the one to hold her through nightmares, to kiss skinned-up knees, to attend school plays with tears streaming down my face because she always hunted for me in the audience first. And I told the court all of it, from the vasectomy to the DNA test. But also about birthday mornings, about bedtime routines, about her favorite lullaby, and the way she would sneak into my room just to listen to my heartbeat when she was scared. And I think that's what saved me, in the end, not the facts, not the timelines, but the truth of our bond, the kind of truth you can't fake or make up, the kind that's present in the small things no one thinks to lie about. And when the judge granted me shared custody, I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt shattered and grateful both at once, because winning required admitting the lie out loud, allowing the world to hear what had happened, and although the court had held in my favor, the damage was already done, and now we had to live in the aftermath of what had been a family once. And we tried therapy, both of us, separately and together. And although I didn't believe in it at first, I came, week after week. Mostly just to sit in silence until I found the strength to talk. And over time I found myself unpacking things I didn't even know I'd brought with me. How much I hated myself for not seeing sooner. How I'd been blaming her for everything but hadn't really allowed myself to feel the weight of what it did to me, as a man, as a partner, as a father. To see the life I'd made had been based on someone else's choice, someone else's lie. And the therapist said something I'll never forget. She said, "You can grieve the lie and still hold on to the love." And that changed something in me. Not all at once, but slowly, like a door creaking open in a dark room, because I realized I didn't have to let the betrayal define every part of me. I didn't have to carry that weight into every conversation, every decision, every moment with my daughter. I could let it sit alongside me without letting it speak for me, and that. Simpler, not easier, just less volatile. and our daughter grew up, started to ask more questions. Why don't you and Mom live together anymore? Did I do something wrong? And those were the times that tried me more than anything, because I wanted to keep her safe from the truth, but I did not want to lie. So I told her versions of things she could get, that sometimes adults mess up, and sometimes people hurt each other even if they don't mean to, but that it was none of her fault, and that I would always be there for her, no matter what. And the way she hugged me after that, tight, desperate, like she'd been holding something inside, made me realize how much she'd been carrying too. And we began to talk more, opening up in little ways, and I was able to laugh again, really laugh, not the kind of forced small talk you exchange with your coworkers, but the kind that comes up from somewhere real. And I knew then that healing wasn't about forgetting what happened, it was about remembering who you were before the hurt and finding a way back to that person, piece by piece. And eventually I began dating again. Slowly, cautiously, with full honesty right from the beginning. And the first time I told someone my story, I expected them to look at me with judgment or pity, but instead she said, "That must have been hell." And she just sat with me in that space, not trying to fix it, not asking for more than I could give, and that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. And even though it didn't happen anything long term, it reminded me that connection was still possible, that I wasn't broken for good, just bruised, and in time, those bruises faded too. And now, standing where I stand, years away from the day everything fell apart, I look at my life and see something I never thought I'd find again. Peace, not the kind that comes from things being perfect, but the kind that comes from knowing I survived something that could have killed me, that I loved without regret, even when I was being lied to, and that I kept showing up, not because I had to, but because it's who I am, and that, to me, is what matters more than anything else, not how it ended, not what she did, but how I chose to respond. How I picked up the pieces and built something steady for myself and my daughter, even when everything around us had fallen apart.